In 2019, a terrible secret came to light in France. The episode occurred during a meeting of the National Association of Veterans, an organization that brings together ex-combatants of war conflicts. In the middle of the meeting, a man asked for silence and announced that he had something important to say. It was Edmond Reveil, 98 years old, who in his youth had been part of the resistance that faced the Nazi occupation and the collaborationist Vichy regime. He was the last survivor of his partisan group, as the rest of him had perished in battle during World War II or from natural causes sometime after. Reveil seemed downcast and a little nervous, although no one suspected what the long-awaited announcement was about. Finally, when he began to speak, his companions felt their blood run cold. The story he told caused quite a stir among those present and later, when it was released, attracted the attention of the international media. Edmond Reveil's story was a clear example of how war turned men into killing machines, hardening their hearts and leading them to commit abominable crimes. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you everything about the brutal massacre of Nazis carried out by the French resistance. To understand this story, we have to go back to D-Day. On June 6, 1943, the Normandy landings took place, that is, an Allied invasion on the coasts of northern France. Through this operation, the enemies of the Axis sought to liberate Europe and advance to the heart of the Third Reich. By then, the French guerrillas were already in contact with the Allies, and were carrying out various espionage and sabotage actions to ensure the success of the invasion. On June 7, the resistance organized a surprise attack on the village of Tulle, located in the center of the country and which was in the hands of the Behrmacht. The action began at dawn, when a partisan fired a bazooka at the German soldiers' barracks. The building burst into flames, alerting the garrison and forcing them to take up positions. The combat lasted for a whole day, with the guerrillas and the Germans fighting in the streets for control of the town. The fighting ended when the Second SS Panzer Division came to the village to reinforce the German infantry. The might of the tanks proved too much for the guerrillas, who on the other hand did not want the fighting to escalate to such a point that the town would be left in ruins. For this reason, they terminated the operation and withdrew to the surrounding forests. The Behrmacht believed that the resistance offensive could not go unnoticed, so they immediately organized a retaliation. He conducted a brief investigation and arrested 120 Tulle residents suspected of collaborating with the partisans. The criteria for the arrests were extremely arbitrary, based on questions such as whether the person had dirty shoes or whether he had not shaved for many days. The Nazis then announced that they would all be executed. When the mayor of the village protested, the commanding officer responded as follows: "This is how we do things on the Eastern Front. In Kharkov and Kiev we killed more than 100,000 men, this means nothing to us." The Germans passed ropes through the balconies of the houses, the trees, and the lampposts. In total, 99 prisoners were hanged and their corpses remained in the open for hours, exposed to the view of the neighbors so that everyone knew what happened when the resistance was helped. Upon learning of the Tulle massacre, fury seized the partisans, although they were careful not to react untimely. During the surprise attack on the village, they had captured about 50 German soldiers, who were now traveling with them as prisoners. Edmond Reveil, whom we told you about at the beginning of the video, was at that time a young member of the resistance in charge of guarding the Germans. In this regard, he recalls this: "We had no use for them, we didn't know what to do. If a German wanted to urinate, he had to do it watched by 2 of us. We didn't even have extra food for them, because we hadn't planned anything like that." The partisans were in contact with the Allies via radio,
which had guaranteed them important logistical help when organizing the offensive on Tulle.
On June 12, 1944, when they were in the town of Behrmacht, they received an unexpected order from the Allied command. They had to execute the 50 prisoners to avenge the death of the Tulle massacre. Not all the detainees were soldiers, but there were also Nazi collaborators, such as the case of a French woman who had reported her neighbors to the Gestapo. Despite the fact that the French were fighting the Nazis for the liberation of their country, the order was not well received. After all, they were convinced of the nobility of their fight and did not want to stain their hands with blood and become murderers through such an act of cruelty. According to Reveil's testimony, when the partisan commander understood what had been entrusted to him, he burst into tears as if he were a child. However, discipline overcame his shame, and he asked for volunteers to form a firing squad. Some volunteered at their own expense, though others rejected the proposal, claiming that this was a crime. Reveil was one of those who refused to kill the prisoners and remained oblivious to the atrocity, although he could not prevent what happened next. The condemned were taken to a field in the Loup Vert area, in the midst of suffocating heat. Once there, they were given shovels and forced to dig their own graves. Despite the fact that the partisans were already prepared to open fire, they could not agree on who would be the one to shoot the French woman accused of collaborating with the Gestapo. They had to draw lots to define who would execute her, since no one wanted to burden their conscience with the murder of a defenseless woman, no matter what her crime had been. When the dispute was resolved, the guerrillas pointed their rifles and opened fire on the 50 prisoners. The corpses were left lying in the graves, after which they were covered with quicklime to cover the traces of the crime. Reveil remembers it this way: "There was a pungent smell of blood. We never spoke of what happened in Loup Vert again." The years passed, the massacre was buried in oblivion, and the families of the victims never found out what their fate had been. Some of the partisans present that day died in combat, although others survived the Second War and died in old age. Eventually, the only living witness to the massacre was Edmond Reveil, who for 75 years had carried this terrible secret with him. Finally, in 2019, weighed down by grief and guilt, he decided it was time to come clean. In this way, by telling his story, he could get rid of a weight that had accompanied him throughout his adult life and that had not allowed him to sleep peacefully. Reveil chose to confess in the middle of a meeting of the National Association of Veterans of France, and from then on he attracted the attention of various media. The former partisan maintains that he would like a memorial to be established at the site of the massacre, so that the site can honor the lives of those who were mercilessly executed by the resistance. Currently, archaeological work is being carried out in the Loup Vert area to find the exact location of the bodies. It is known that this case is not strange at all, and that there are still dozens of similar episodes of massacres that occurred in World War II that were not disclosed and that still await justice. We reached the end of the video, and we want to ask you, do you think the killing of Nazis was justified? Leave your answer in the comment box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.